Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna T435 top panel chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it's just not running right. Well, the first thing I usually look at when I'm working on a saw is what's in the fuel tank. And initially looking in here, it doesn't look bad. The color looks alright. It doesn't smell old. But it's really a good idea to take a close look at it. Look at the color of that mix, looks pretty good. I'm going to get everything out of this tank. Now, while it's in the tank, it's hard to tell if there's any water in there, if there's a lot of water in there. And you'll see here in this funnel that it initially doesn't look that bad, but there's so much water in there that you don't get to see like a little bubble in the fuel tank, a little bubble of water rolling around. You're looking right through the level of the water in the tank. And here I'm just kind of eyeballing it myself, but I'll give you a closer shot of this. Yeah, what I'm getting at is don't be fooled, because when I looked in the fuel tank on the saw, I could not see a bubble of water rolling around, but clearly that water is settled on the bottom there. Clearly there was just a ton of water in this thing. So I want to get the tank flushed out, make sure there's no water left in there. And if I use a little bit of heat or isopropyl alcohol, it will absorb that moisture and hold it in suspension. And then I added a little bit of gasoline to mix the whole mess together. And what I'm trying to do is get that water in suspension and then come out with the gasoline when I shake the can or the tank out again. But before I do all that, I'm going to remove the old filter and I'm going to pressure test the fuel line. I had 10 pounds of pressure, that's good. When I hit the primer bulb, I should lose about a pound of pressure each time I do that. It's unseating the needle for a second and losing pressure. Now I'm switching my gauge over to vacuum and I'm pumping the primer bulb and I'm pulling vacuum on the metering chamber. And if I'm able to pull this down to 5 inches of mercury or so and it holds, then I know that the check valve in the carburetor is holding. So that all passed the test. We'll put the new filter on, and now I'm going to dump that mix of fuel and alcohol out of there, and hopefully any water remains in suspension as now is poured out of the tank. If I think there's still moisture in there, I could put some towels or paper towels or something like that inside and let it absorb that up and then pull the paper towel out. So the next thing I always look at is the condition of the piston and cylinder. On this saw, we have to remove this little cover underneath the tank, and it'll reveal the spark plug. Get our scrunch out and break this thing loose. Then we're going to use our Princeton spark plug removal tool. This thing's pretty handy when you have a recessed spark plug like this. Makes it a lot easier for getting these plugs in and out. Alright, our inspection camera goes in. And a quick look in the cylinder. Quick fuzzy look. I'm really just looking to see if the cylinder is scored or not. I mean, I don't see anything in here that's alarming. There we go. It's got some wear to it. Nothing crazy going on. We're happy with that. Compression test could be done right now if you wanted. So we are putting a new spark plug in this saw. There's your part number. And in it goes. Torqued to spec. Does anyone ever torque their spark plugs down? Let me know down in the comments. I think these get, what, 23 Newton meters maybe? Sounds familiar. It's been so long since I looked at a spark plug spec. I don't remember. You need to get the gasket crushed. In fact, I have a torque wrench set up in a toolbox with a spark plug socket on it that for a while there I was using just to torque the plugs down. Kind of gave up on that. Pretty clean underneath the hood here. This air filter mounts kind of in a unique way. Just the rubber, the tension from that rubber mount on there holds it in place. So there's 3 screws that got to come out to remove this carburetor. The carb's coming off because of all the water that we found in the tank. This screw on the top of the handle, that's being removed because to get the throttle linkage off, I'm going to need a little bit of extra play in it. So we're unseating the carburetor. And it's coming off a little bit hard because one of the lines is a barbed fitting pushed into the impulse hose underneath the carburetor. So there you can see kind of lifting that handle up, and that's giving me just enough room to get that throttle linkage out of the carburetor. And we're going to try and pop our fuel line off. This is the tool I made for pulling fuel line. That thing's really stuck on there. I couldn't quite get underneath it. I'm going to try a little screwdriver. And I'm not really getting a lot of torque with that. So another tool that I made was a snap ring pliers that I ground a fancy end on it. We'll see if this works. Trying to get the right angle so I can show you. Look at that, it popped it right off of there. My new favorite tool. Alright, we've harvested a carburetor. One we suspect was sucking a lot of water. This carburetor is a little unique. There's a screw on the front that holds this secondary throttle assembly in place. So we have to remove that screw before we can get into the carburetor. And the linkage doesn't have to come apart. We can just roll this assembly out of our way. So there's 4 screws, but 2 of them are going through an extra bracket. And those 2 screws going through that bracket are a little longer than the other 2 screws. So pay attention to that. Don't get them mixed up. Now we can remove that bracket and the metering chamber cover. There's our metering diaphragm. It's stuck on there pretty good. There we go. Little schmutz in there. Scrape some of the gasket. No, it's not like I see standing water in this thing or anything like that. It actually isn't in as bad a shape as I thought it would be. So we're going to take the metering lever and the needle out of here. There's the needle. There it is. Let's look at the other side. Let's look at the fuel pump side. Single screw holding the fuel pump plate in place. Yeah, I hate it when that happens. Scraping that gasket off of that cover is the worst. Not a big fan. Got some activity going on here next to my work area. I'm getting distracted a little bit. You know, just the noise isn't that big a deal, but the guy's got a pallet full of something heavy right next to me. And there's a big transition in the level of the outside concrete and the inside concrete. So he's trying to lift a pallet up 8 or 10 feet and then go over that transition, and I don't know how secure the load was on the forklift, and I'm standing next to it, so I was a little bit distracted. Alright, we found a carb kit in our pocket. K27 WAT. Here's our micro screen. I still don't see massive water issues here. Alright, we're going to put the new micro screen in place. Just kind of seat it down in there nice. Just trying to get it even. A little bit of corrosion, I guess. Probably water damage. Here is our fuel pump. This one's rubber. And then this little scraping operation has to happen. This one isn't actually as bad as a lot of them can be. I cut some of it out of the video. Alright, we found our gasket match. And you'll notice I'm holding the throttle open a little bit so that the idle stop screw, which is on that pump plate, doesn't interfere with the linkage. And it was interfering a little bit because I jiggled the thing and got the gasket all upset. Gonna try it again. Looks like we got it. Alright, back to the metering pump, metering chamber side of the carburetor. And we need a gasket. But before we do that, we have to put the new needle in. So there's the needle. I think there's some shipping protectant or something on that rubber tip of the needle, so I always clean them off. Now what I want to do is put the spring down and then hang the needle on the metering lever and drop the assembly in there. So there I've got the metering lever, cross shaft. Here's our spring. And that spring, for whatever reason, it will not stand up straight. It just keeps flopping over. I tried flipping the spring over. I looked in the bottom of the carburetor to see what was going on there, if it was cast a little weird. It almost looks like it was. But I cannot get that spring to stand up straight in there, and if I can't get it to stand up straight, I can't hardly drop that metering lever over the top of it without the spring ending up laying sideways underneath it. And I saved you the agony of, I don't know, probably 5 attempts to do this. Maybe more. And I finally remembered a trick that I've used in the past. I'm going to use a razor blade to hold that spring vertical. Just kind of supporting the spring like that with the blade. And now I can do what I was trying to do. The needle is in the metering lever with the cross shaft in place. And I'll be able just to drop that assembly right in over the top of the spring. I don't know where I went. There we go. That pliers will make it easier for me to work above that razor blade though. So it went in over the top. I pull the blade out of the way. Push the shaft over where it belongs. And then run our screw down. It doesn't happen often, but once in a while I run into this situation where I have to support that spring. And, you know, once you do it that way, it works pretty good. Alright, so I was just looking at the model of the carburetor so that I could use the correct gauge to check the metering lever height. And there we go. We matched the model of the carb to the gauge, checking the height. The nub on that gauge should just be touching that metering lever when I lay it across the sides of the carburetor. Now we can get to putting the gaskets on. Base gasket, metering diaphragm. Cover. It's important to put this cover on the right way. Now we have to organize our long and our short screws. It's a short screw going in, another short screw, and we have this bracket. That'll get the long screws. And then once we got them all oriented properly, we'll tighten it down. Now we just flip that secondary throttle assembly into place, and there will be a single screw to hold it there. And I've been putting Loctite on this single screw. I've seen a couple of them where that screw vibrated out, so I Loctite them now. It's blue Loctite, medium strength. You know, it'll come back apart if it has to. Alright, that should be it for our carburetor. We'll have to get this back into the saw. Alright, so that's where our throttle linkage gets attached. Now we're going to put our fuel line on. Just like that. And then we have to make sure that our fitting for our impulse line is lined up on there. And a screw that goes through the secondary throttle assembly right here. The screw that holds the top handle down. And a couple of screws going through the air filter mount. I shouldn't have tightened that bottom screw because the top ones weren't quite lined up. They're still fighting me. Just gotta wiggle it around a little bit. It's very close. Here we go. And don't forget the bottom one. Looks like the linkage is working the way it should. And we'll install our air filter. Looks good. Alright, we're going to put some fuel in this thing and see if it'll start and run. Might have to make a few carburetor adjustments. Looks like I still have some driveway sealer on my arm there from weekend project. Alright, it's pumping up nice. It's purging properly. Let's see if it runs. got it to run. Runs pretty decent. Couldn't get it to stop. I popped the switch out of there and just shorted across the two terminals, and that didn't kill it. So I suspect that there's a problem down by the ignition coil. Let's take a look in here. Got to get those 4 screws off the starter plus the one on that handle. So there we go. There's a wire off. But don't be tricked into just putting this wire back on without a little bit more inspection. The reason the wire comes off of these T435s right here, if you see there's a wiring that passes out of that chamber and then up into the base by the carburetor, into the handle. And when the saw flexes, it pulls on that wiring. And if there's not enough slack in there, then it can pull that right off of the terminal. And that's why, at least I find a number of T435s with that wire popped off of there. You got to make sure that there's enough slack in the wire to allow for that flex. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna T435 top panel chainsaw that had a lot of water in the fuel. Thanks for watching. Later.